You've heard, I would rather die than give a public speech. All right, those who want to die, line up over here. No? Do you think there are people who would rather die than give a public speech? No, not really. I don't think so. But to be honest with you, I think there are people who feel like they're dying when they give a public speech. Amy.
Yes, sir.
You were raised on a horse ranch. You know, when I was a kid, I watched cowboy movies, horses, pistols, bad guys, Indians, and I saw how those bronco busters would break a horse. They'd tie the horse up, they'd throw the saddle on it, and it'd, and then they'd jump up on top of that horse, and the horse would buck, and they would have to hold on for dear life until that horse finally was broke. Is that how it's really done today?
Not anymore.
How would you think breaking a horse could be done?
Gently, softly.
You know, I've seen my neighbor. She is really a horse whisperer, and she has horses. She teaches people how to break horses. She'll take a chair, and she'll go out in the middle of the corral, and she'll set that chair down, and she'll sit in that chair, and for maybe 5 hours, she won't move. She'll just sit there. Oh, first the horse will shy away, but pretty soon it gets kind of curious, and it starts coming around, seeing like, hey, what's the matter? You got a problem or something? And before you know it, the horse starts to look at you as a non-threatening person, human being. I remember when I was a child, I wanted to ride the bucking bronco that my dad caught in the western desert. He couldn't ride it. My brothers couldn't ride it. I was 4 years old, and by golly, I was going to ride it. I fed that horse apples and carrots. I went out and I pulled my grandma's carrots. I stole apples off my neighbor's trees, and I would feed that horse every day, so that every time I went to the corral, that horse would come over to me expecting apples and carrots. And finally, one day, I got that horse up against the corral, and I climbed up on the rail, and I jumped on top of that horse, and that horse jumped out from under me, and I landed on my bum. Oh, that hurt. Have you ever broke your tailbone? Or felt like you broke your tailbone? That's a pain. And I was crying my eyes out. My mom comes out and she goes, "What's the matter, Davy? What's the matter?" And I couldn't tell her the truth. Are you kidding me? She forbid me to go anywhere near that horse because she thought it might kill me. And it practically did. So what do I tell my mom? A great big giant dinosaur stepped on my bum and broke it. And you know what she said? "Davy, I don't want you to ever try to ride that horse again." How did she know? Well, when I was young, in the same manner, I was a member of the predominant religion here in Utah. And one of the assignments that little kids have, ever since they can learn how to speak, is to get up and bear their testimony. You know what that means? You're supposed to get up and tell people that you know that your church is true. That's how they start breaking you into the church, into believing it's true. I may not agree with that system, but that's what they do. Now, one of the things they do to help you overcome your fear of public speaking is to assign a 2.5-minute talk. And you're supposed to get up there and talk about something, whatever it is, but you're supposed to do it for 2.5 minutes. I hated public speaking. I couldn't stand getting up and telling people what I believed because, frankly, I didn't know what I believed. I was such a slow thinker that when people were in conversation and I had an idea of something I might be able to say to contribute to that conversation, by the time I got the nerve to say it, they'd moved on to another conversation and it was senseless for me to make a point. And that's how I progressed. I was too slow to contribute to any conversation. Thus, when I would get up to give a 2.5-minute speech, guess what would happen to me? I would start crying. I would shake, my knees would quake, the world would start spinning around, things would start going dark, and I would become speechless. I would wish that I were dead. Now, this went on for many years. And finally, because of practice, because they give you like I was called on a mission, they give you a lesson manual. At that time, there were 6 lessons, and you were to memorize verbatim those lessons. That made it easier for me to state my purpose and to speak my mind. But when I got off my mission and I came home and I no longer had a manual that I could rely on, guess what would happen to me? I'd get up to give a speech. I would start to cry. The world would go black. Stars would come out and start spinning around. And so I told myself that I would never be a speaker. I would never be a writer, particularly because I couldn't spell. And always my thoughts were a beat behind wherever anybody else's thoughts might be. It was an embarrassment to me. One day, I was hunting. My dad owned a mountain. Do any of you have family or father that owned an entire mountain? My dad owned a mountain, and I loved deer hunting. There were some of the biggest bucks up on that mountain, and it was my goal that someday I was going to take my rifle and I was going to go up on that mountain and I was going to shoot the king of the forest. I forgot my canteen. Just like right now, my mouth was so dry that I couldn't wait to get out of there and go get a drink of water. That's what I wanted more than anything else, a drink of water. I didn't care about the deer. I wanted to get down to that mine tunnel where about 1/4 mile back in was some of the freshest water you'd ever drink. And then I ran into another hunter. He was alone. And we began talking, and he said, "Well, I gotta go." I said, "Oh, end of the day for you, huh? You giving up?" "No, I forgot my canteen, and I'm thirsty." And I said, "Well, isn't that a coincidence? So am I. Let me take you to some of the best water you'll ever drink." I didn't tell him that he had to walk back inside of a mine tunnel for 1/4 mile. And he wasn't very comfortable about it. And I said, "Well, I tell you what, run your feet along the rails, and I guarantee you won't get lost. And if you want to go out, just turn around and run your feet along the rails, and you'll go out." I took him back to the water, and as I was walking back, I began thinking about this weird anomaly in the wall of the tunnel, a little bit farther back than the water. I thought, gosh, it's like imprints of cloven hooves in the wall. How did those imprints of cloven hooves get in the wall? And isn't it interesting that right across from those cloven hooves is a great big round boulder a smaller tunnel entrance. Ooh, this gives me an idea. What if the devil, Satan himself, pushed that boulder in there, blocking the miner back inside of that tunnel? And I started formulating a story in my mind. A story that takes 25 minutes to tell. And I formulated that story, put it all together in less than a minute. We were there drinking that wonderful water. And I said, come with me. I want to tell you a story. I had about half a pack of matches left. What we do, we'd light a match, you'd see where he's going, the match would burn my fingers, and then we'd run our feet along the rails. I did the same thing. I took him back almost where those cloven hoof prints were, where that great big boulder was rolled in place. I told him a story that scared him so bad, he ran out of that tunnel in the dark. And when I walked out into the daylight, there he was with his pants off, and he was fanning his pants, trying to dry them out. Because I had literally scared the pee right out of him. That week, I was invited to go to a storytelling meeting. I was asked to tell a story because all of the storytellers weren't prepared. They didn't have anything to say. I had a story. And I got up in front of my peers, managers at the Salt Lake City Corporation, and I told that scary story. And this one woman came up to me afterward and she said, I want you to speak at Theater 138 and tell that story for our Halloween storytelling. Well, I wrote that story, 14 pages. I wrote that story and I parked in parking lots. The police had come check on me because they thought I was some kind of a weirdo because I'm in there going, talking. And I memorized that story verbatim. I knew exactly what I was going to say. And I got up on that stage, and I couldn't see the audience because of all the lights that were shining on me. But I knew there were a lot of people there. I was scared to death. I was so terrified that the world started going even darker. The stars were coming out and spinning around, and I was just about ready to run away when I knew that in desperation, I would have to take that fright, I would have to take that fear and focus that fear into that story, because after all, it was a scary story about the devil. Well, when it was all over with, I was told by a professional storyteller that I'd better get home and start writing more stories because I was going to be a professional storyteller. And I'm going to be honest with you. There's only been a few times in the thousands of presentations that I have given where I have felt stage fright since that day. Because I learned to take the energy, the fear, I learned to take my insecurities, and I learned to focus that energy into my story so that it meant something, so that there was passion at what I had to say. And this is my advice to you. This is why I think you're coming to Toastmasters, because I believe you have something to say. You just want the nerve and the cojones to say it. You know, friends come and go. Loving relationships can turn sour into hatred. And maybe it's because we never really learn how to say what we should say. Maybe it's because we're afraid to speak our mind. I think that if we do learn to speak our mind, tactfully, that we can have better relationships. And we can be proud of who we are. Thank you.
Take a moment to send David a love note. The sign up for Wednesday's party has reached me, so I'm going to pass it around this side and then go back to its originator. Fred, can I please get a timer's report for our